Dr. Forrest Harris, who has a distinguished career as a theologian and a professor, and someone that we need to know his history. I think he's been an extremely important person in Nashville's history. And so let's give him a big welcome.
Thank you so much for that big welcome. It's good to be here. I've been excited about coming to share when I received the invitation some time ago, and to take advantage of this full hour. Yes. I want to get started. So I am Forrest Harris, and I am President Emeritus. All that means is they expect me to work without pay. Of American Baptist College, professor at Vanderbilt Divinity School, and Black Church Studies scholar. So the world that founded and shaped American Baptist College, and the question that helps us understand that shaping is, what does it mean to be Black and Christian in America? The question that is at the center of American Baptist College's founding and history. If I can get this right, I think I messed up already. Nope, go the other way. Okay, now the next one goes down. So American Baptist College is actually celebrating 100 years, actually now 102 years of existence in North Nashville. So the central organizing question of American Baptist College's existence, what does it mean to be Black and Christian in America, as I indicated, this question is not abstract theology. It is the central organizing question of American Baptist College's existence. Every dimension of the college's history can be understood as the extension or an extended wrestling with this single question. It is paradoxical in birth of the school. It's educational as it relates to its mission. It is impactful as it relates to its student body, and its movement legacy that we will talk about in nonviolent movement for justice and freedom, and as it relates to its continuing vocation as a school. That book on the left, What It Means to Be Black and Christian, is a combination of essays that were written some time ago, back in 1992, that I was able to sponsor as part of the Keller Mills Smith Institute on the Black Church. The picture below is Dr. Julius Scruggs, former student and former president of the American Baptist, of the National Baptist Convention, USA Incorporated. I don't know the other student in the picture. It's a historical picture. And the picture on either side are some of the early students of American Baptist College. So the question at the founding, 1924, an institution born asking this question. American Baptist College was born asking this question before its first building rose on what we call the Holy Hill. Can you say the Holy Hill? I'll tell you why I'm telling you to say that. I have a Baptist kind of response. This partnership between National Baptist and Southern Baptist Convention created an institution that embodied the question institutionally. Two conventions, two answers. The question embedded in the founding paradox. Two conventions, two racial histories, two theological imaginations, one institution. They founded one institution, and in their founding, Southern Baptist and National Baptist, and the picture in the middle is the cooperation between the two, being Christian meant personal salvation and survival in a hostile society. Those were the two ideologies. That's National Baptist, personal salvation and survival in a hostile society. Southern Baptist, predominantly white, personal conversion through crisis atonement. The gospel included for National Baptist, predominantly black, liberation of the body and not just the soul. Southern Baptist, saving the soul for eternity. The theological source for National Baptists, for their understanding, was the hush harbors, enslaved ancestors' faith, the Exodus story in the Bible. For Southern Baptists, it was basically doctrinal orthodoxy, individual repentance. The unspoken question then for National Baptists, can we be Christian and free in a nation that denies our freedom? For Southern Baptists, is the gospel only about heaven and not about justice on earth? That was the tension that these two conventions had as they founded this one institution. The founding of American Baptist College in 1924 then did not occur in isolation. It emerged from long historical currents that reshaped the American South in the 19th century, particularly the aftermath of the Trail of Tears, the religious awakening movement of the Second Great Awakening, and the economic transformation of the Industrial Revolution. Each of these movements helped create the social, religious, and moral landscape that made the college necessary. The Trail of Tears, land displacement and southern landscape, the forced removal of native nations from the southeast in the 1830s opened the vast land across Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi to white settlement and plantation expansion. This transformation had several consequences that shaped the future environment in which American Baptist College would eventually arise. The newly opened lands fueled the expansion of plantation slavery across the Deep South. Enslaved Africans and their descendants formed large black communities throughout the region. After the Civil War, those same communities built independent black churches, which became centers of education, leadership formation, and resistance. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, black Baptist churches across the South sought institutions that could educate ministers and leaders capable of confronting racism, poverty, and segregation. The long historical aftermath of displacement, slavery, and Reconstruction created the spiritual urgency behind such schools. The Trail of Tears was not only a tragedy of native dispossession, it was also a moment when enslaved Africans walked the same road of suffering, bound in chains to a system of slavery that had already reshaped native societies. Along that trail marched two histories of grief intertwined: indigenous displacement and African bondage, revealing how the violence of the American frontier did not move along a single line of oppression, but along many. The revealing part about this graphic is that in and on the Trail of Tears were enslaved Africans. The question the founders did not resolve. The space created wrestling with this question that I introduced earlier. What does it mean to be black and Christian in America? The college's founding documents did not resolve this tension that existed as it relates to Southern Baptists and National Baptists. They created a space where the question had to be asked and where generations of students would have to answer it for themselves. Can the gospel be personal salvation and social liberation? Can black Christians be fully Christian and fully free in a nation that denies their freedom? Then the school, as the nation in terms of Christendom in America, experienced the first and second Great Awakening. In the early 1900s, evangelists like Charles Finney led religious revivals called the Second Great Awakening. Highly emotional camp meetings with thousands in attendance. Preachers talked about forgiveness of sin and acting morally. By 1850, 1 in 6 Americans was a member of a church. Then, with the Great Awakening, you had the Walter Rauschenbusch, 1861 to 1918, was an American theologian and Baptist pastor who taught at Rochester Theological Seminary. Rauschenbusch was a key figure in the social gospel flourishing movement. The social gospel flourished in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th century. So what we have now set up is a tension between the social gospel and the gospel understood as an individual private experience that is disassociated with the liberation of persons' bodies and freedom and equity. So the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, and the need for educated leaders, the Industrial Revolution transformed the American economy and social order during the late 19th century and 20th centuries. For black communities in the South, industrialization created both opportunity and crisis. Urban migration happened rapidly from rural areas to cities like Nashville, Birmingham, Memphis, Atlanta, Chicago, on up north. The emergence of a working class black population navigating industrial labor, segregation, and economic exploitation. Increasing demand for leaders who could address social injustice, labor inequality, and community development. Black churches responded by expanding their role beyond worship to include education, social uplift, and civic leadership. Institutions like American Baptist College were created to prepare ministers who could interpret the gospel in the midst of modern social industrialization. So, to summarize these two movements, the Trail of Tears, the land disposition, and the Southern landscape that forced the Native Americans from Southeast on into the landscape of Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. This transformation had several consequences that shaped the future environment in which American Baptist College would eventually rise. The newly open land fueled the expansion of plantation slavery and the like. Enslaved Africans and their descendants formed large communities throughout the region. So after the Civil War, those same communities built these churches and became centers of education, formation, and resistance. So by the late 19th and 18th and 20th century, which I showed in the previous slide, Black Baptist churches across the South saw institutions that could educate ministers and leaders capable of confronting these social issues. Griggs Hall, the first building built on the campus of American Baptist College, housed the administration, housed the students, housed the classrooms, and the like. The founding of American Baptist College in 24 emerged from the deep currents of 19th century American history. The displacement of native peoples through the Trail of Tears opened the southern landscape to plantation expansion and growth of black communities whose churches would later seek educated leadership. The evangelical fervor of the Second Great Awakening nurtured the rise of the Black Baptist tradition, shaping a theology of conversion, freedom, and community responsibility. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution transformed southern cities and created new social challenges that demanded spiritual grounding, intellectually trained leaders. American Baptist College was born at the intersection of these forces, formed by the memory of displacement, the fire of revival faith, and the urgent need for justice-minded leadership in a changing world. I might pause just to make sure we have described these forces, these intersections that gave shape to the rise of American Baptist College. So what does it mean to be black and Christian? The question in the Jim Crow classroom. White only, colored signs. It was not an academic issue here. It was existential. Students, founders, inherited an existential social crisis of segregation. The first decades unfolded under legal segregation. Students walked past colored signs on their way to study scripture. They learned Pauline or Paul's theology while living in a world that denied their citizenship. They studied the prophets in a society that lynched black bodies. So think about it a moment and imagine these existential crises, these existential barriers for a person's full humanity to be exercised, freedom and justice, that was a promise in the Constitution, but was not something that was given them. That American Baptist College, these institutions existed in that environment to be an educational center for students' empowerment and leadership. So that the brutal contradiction they had to deal with every day. Students faced it every day. If American Christianity can baptize racial terror, can it truly be Christian? That's another horrendous question that the history of this school dealt with. What they studied. On one side, God created all people in God's image. On the other side, society proclaimed black people less than human. The gospel proclaimed freedom. Jim Crow denied freedom. The prophets demanded justice. The law enforced injustice. The church is the body of Christ. The white church was silent, many of them, not all of them, on segregation. That is the environment in which this institution existed. If Christianity, raise this question again, can baptize racial terror, can it truly be Christian? That question, along what it means to be black and Christian in America, created the curriculum, the environment, the liberal arts education that shaped itself at American Baptist College, Fisk University, and HBCUs across the country. And believe me, on campus, these questions were a part of fierce debates. Fierce and faithful. The question did not yield a single answer. If it generated fierce, faithful debate among folk, two groups. Fundamentalist students argued, the gospel is about one thing only, Christ crucified as payment for individual sins. To talk about structures and systems about segregation and justice is to muddy the message. Being Christian means being saved. Being saved means going to heaven, and the rest is a distraction. It had fierce debates, even when I got there. Later in the these debates were going on in different contexts. Other students opened their Bible and found the prophets thundering against the powerful. Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Jesus announcing good news to the poor, release to the captives, liberty to the oppressed. And I wish you could be a fly on the wall. Even today, if you go on the campus, people are having these debates in variations of contextual experiences as it relates to inclusion of persons who are different from themselves, as it relates to all of the political issues that are facing the nation. These debates still go on today. But the hidden curriculum was there. It was not in the catalog. It was not, because the formal curriculum was biblical studies, homiletics, pastoral care, and Baptist polity. That was in the catalog. But the hidden curriculum, as David Haberstand noted in his book, The Children, American Baptist College, was a place filled with political ferment and passion. Its faculty was gifted, and its students, many of them, diamonds in the rough, were hungry to learn. They experienced racism in the Deep South, the colored signs and the white signs, the brutal blows, the Jim Crow kind of codes. And they came to education wondering how to make sense of Christianity and religion and having to live under that kind of environment. I was fortunate to meet David Haberstand. He came on campus. He died, unfortunately, in California in an accident. But David Haberstand's book, The Children, chronicles the early days of the civil rights movement in the United States, focusing on the Nashville student movement from 1959 to 1962. The book highlights the lives of young activists, including James Lawson, James Bevel, John Lewis, and C.T. Vivian, and Diane Nash, who played pivotal roles in the movement. Haberstand describes the political ferment and passion at American Baptist College, where many of these young leaders were educated and trained. The book is noted for its intimate and monumental portrayal of the movement, showcasing the courage and vision of ordinary students, ordinary people who made history. So, they arrived hungry. I think any educational institution that can feed people's hunger for learning, for knowledge, is worthy of its existence. These students arrived hungry. The movement generation comes to American Baptist College. Nobody knew. The founders, Southern Baptists, nor National Baptists, knew that American Baptist College would become a movement ground. A generation would come there that would make a difference in the nation. When John Lewis arrived on campus, when Bernard Lafayette, I'm going to talk about him later, who passed away this last week, C.T. Vivian walked those halls. They were hungry to do something about racial injustice of segregation laws in downtown Nashville. They found on campus not a settled answer, but a living question. That question just did not remain static without the living challenge that it raised. And in their wrestling, they began a theological revolution. So these debates were not abstract. They were about what students should do. The debates on campus were not arguments about, theology, or in the graduate school, we would call it epistemological justifications, some theological category that had big words, but you couldn't explain what those words meant. They were arguments about what students should do when they walk off campus and encounter segregation. How do you put your theology with feet and hands walking the streets of a segregated culture? Should they accept it as the way of the world and focus just on saving souls? Or should they challenge it as contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ? The question demanded an answer, not in words, but in acts. And as C.T. Vivian has written a book, who passed away a couple of years ago, he said the action is in the movement, the word is in the action. That's where you find the answer to the question. What does it mean to be black and Christian in America? The Bible was not silent on structural sin. What the scriptures actually say, they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample the heads of the poor into the dust of the earth. Amos 2:6-7. Then the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives, Luke 4:18. And then Isaiah 1:17, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, and bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. The Bible overflows with God's response to poverty, injustice, and unethical governance. If you cut out those scriptures about justice, if you cut out and took a Bible and just cut out those scriptures all through the Bible, you would not have a Bible, but you would have a fragmented representation that takes the core of the issue of the Bible out. You will not have a Bible any longer. So that created for these students prophetic preaching, to present this understanding of the gospel and of God's character in the life of Jesus in a way that spoke a liberation for the oppressed. So we had James Lawson and C.T. Vivian. Last week, Vanderbilt launched his memoir. We have a James Lawson Institute on Nonviolence at Vanderbilt. And as you remember, Vanderbilt expelled James Lawson during the movement, and they lived in this tension as well. What does justice and the gospel and higher education actually means? Civil disobedience and the way in which Lawson trained students to do and be about nonviolence ended up not being what Vanderbilt called the school of the prophets, Schola Prophetorum. And yet that corrected the vision of Vanderbilt later years. And I've been there now 35 years teaching these very things. But James Lawson and King, they met in Overland, and after King's lecture, he encouraged Lafayette to come to the South. Lafayette had been working with a Fellowship for Reconciliation, and said, we need you to come to the South as soon as you can. And he did. And when he got there, here is him at Clark Memorial or one of the institutions, ABC or somewhere, where he was teaching nonviolent resistance. And you can almost see the outline of his teaching. If you're going to take direct action, nonviolence is the method, and then you have to have a way of appropriating how you do that. One, education. You can see it almost down to preparation, negotiation, direct action, and follow-up. They did that training before they went to the lunch counters. They did that training so long and demonstrated what and how to be on a lunch counter and not be nonviolent. Greensboro, North Carolina, sat at the lunch counter and came out first, but they came out next. But Nashville's movement was the only movement that desegregated a downtown in the South, the first to do it. So their answer took the shape in action. The question answered by the movement's generation. Their answer to the question was, in Nashville's sit-in movement, the Freedom Rides, Selma, and the Voting Rights Act, it was a lifetime of witness, all coming from that incubator on the campus of American Baptist College. What their answer meant then, it meant to be black and Christian in America means their answer changed America. Their answer or their response changed the nation. And there's a passage that says, if salt loses its savor, loses its power, it's good for nothing. I have said in my lectures that the salt of the movement, the salt of justice, the salt of freedom through the agency of these institutions and students, American democracy would have long lost its savor. It kept alive the democratic promise. Youth, faith cannot be separated from, your faith cannot be separated from your freedom. The God who saved your soul also cares about your body. That's women's body, that's black people's bodies, that's immigrants' bodies, that's bodies who are marginal. The gospel is not only about eternity, but also about justice in time. You cannot worship on Sunday and accept segregation on Monday. Love demands action. Faith requires works. Hope refuses to let the world end as it is. That was what happened in the movement. Young people in jail. John Lewis delivering the speech right before Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream. Can you imagine? A student from American Baptist College stands at the Lincoln Memorial before Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech because he lived in that ferment and in that tension. And we have a white paper on John Lewis and John Lewis, Bernard Lafayette, and James Bevel on the Cumberland. And Bernard Lafayette, living the tension, his mother wrote him and said, you are not doing what you're supposed to do. We sent you up here to get an education, and you cannot treat white people because they give you money to go to school. And he said she just don't understand because she was caught in that tension as well. And there's C.T. Vivian, Diane Nash, and Bernard Lafayette walking downtown to the mayor's office, Briley, who met them there. That question was answered in the action. They were jailed. We have the question remains alive today. They lived one answer. Others would answer differently. They did not resolve the question for everyone. They lived one answer, an answer that cost them beatings, jail, and for some, their lives. But the question remains alive for others to answer in their own context. The question does not have a singular answer. It could be, what does it mean to be white and Christian in America? It can mean, what does it mean to be black and Christian in America? What does it mean to be immigrant and Christian or other religious traditions in America? And how does these religious traditions all come to consensus about justice and freedom and human flourishing for all people? What their answer meant then to be black and Christian in America means. Can you read these with me? I think I get you more excited about them. Can you read it? They up on the screen. One. There was a previous slide, but I set you up for this one. So Bernard Lafayette, who passed away last week at 85, behind the scenes, went to Selma to set up the movement for Selma's, and you recall, Bloody Sunday crossing the Edmunds Pettus Bridge. He was president of American Baptist College, and I followed him. He brought that wisdom of nonviolence and the way in which nonviolence is an act of not only resistance, but a way of educating and changing people's perspective of each other and affirming the humanity of other people. In Birmingham, you remember these issues of the humanity of black people were assaulted in a way wherein the nation's dominant understanding of them did not treat them equitably as citizens. The question in my presidency from 1999 to 2025, new forms of an old question. When I returned to American Baptist College as president in 1999, the question was still there. It had not gone away. It had only taken new forms. The college had survived decades of underfunding and marginalization. It had produced leaders who changed the nation, yet it remained invisible. The theological residue of white Baptist paternalism lingered. They were willing to give monies to the school, but not sufficient enough as they had given to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville. And the reason why Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville ended up not being the place for black ministers to be trained was because of this segregated culture. Accreditation expectation. To be accredited, you had to have certain resources and academic resources. All of that, when I got there, was on the margins of challenge. But we were able to reverse it, and the college is fully accredited by the Biblical Association of Bible Colleges, the Biblical Association of Higher Education. That was its old name. Funding relationships. My role as emeritus president, as I say, is to work doing these kind of things without pay. I've just met the president this morning earlier on an interview with Channel 5 because of the passing of Bernard Lafayette. Institutional self-understanding we continue to create with our board of trustees. These new students, the question became institutional. What does it mean to be black and Christian in America? For 26 years, I watched students arrive with the same hunger Haberstein had named, diamonds in the rough, hungry to learn, carrying dreams their communities had placed in them. This student that's raising this candle came on the campus, he was just 19, and he is growing, he's still there, he hasn't graduated. The student at the bottom is Cyrus Wilson, incarcerated for for 18 years. And we had an inside-out program in the college where we went inside and the persons inside became our colleagues in learning. He was finally released, came to American Baptist College, graduated summa cum laude, and is leading a nonprofit. Each one proof that the question was still alive, still being answered in new ways. The question in the lives of students. Another student, Damien Durr, the contemporary answer that he gives to it, he came from Cleveland. He could not pass standardized tests. You know, people have what you call test phobia, kind of like when you go to the doctor and you get in there and you get phobic kind of reaction to getting your blood pressure and it goes up. That's me. I just get nervous going into the doctor. Well, Damien had test phobia, smart, intellectually bright, but never could pass the standardized test in Cleveland that would give him and permit him to graduate. The system had labeled him, measured him, and found him wanting. He took up house roofing. That's honest work, noble work, but it was not his calling. Beneath the failure, the test had named there was a sacred burning fire. Now, I just left Chicago 2 weeks ago, was able to go by and visit the Jackson family, Jesse Jackson's family, as he lie in repose. Guess what? The Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, an NGO with the United Nations, we just affirmed Damien Durr, was on the left, as the new General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. I watched him stand before the National Baptist Convention to encourage them to give more to the college. As he stood there, I noticed his shoes, worn thin, the heels turned right and left from years of walking through streets of Cleveland, through Nashville classrooms, and through the doors that had not yet been opened. But today, God has given him a new set of shoes to walk with justice and love in his heart as General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. That's Daniel. He answers the question. He answers it as a national organization serving pastors, leaders, and the next generation, advocating for social justice within the black church tradition. And with this United Nations status, he will be sitting with nations as they assemble, advocating for justice locally and globally. He answers the question, but the question is answered only in the action. So, to honor Jesse Jackson, can you say it with me? Keep hope. Keep hope. Keep hope. Damien rises to that. He came with me last week. He rises at the same time Jesse Jackson's laid in repose at the Rainbow Push headquarters in Chicago. So has America ever fully resolved the issue that created American Baptist College? The question is not going away. That is why American Baptist College is still needed. Then it was segregated laws. Now segregation is legal, but racial inequality. Segregation is illegal, but racial inequality still persists. Some want to feel that it has been resolved. But prison mass incarceration and the disproportionate number of persons of color will indicate that's not the truth. Black churches worship under threat. That was then. The 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, I'm going too long, let me know, just raise my hand. 16th Street Baptist Church bombed 4 girls, murdered. Black churches are free now, but black bodies are still targeted. The gospel was preached, the gap between personal salvation and social justice.